Greetings from Floweirda, folks. I am Joe Turino. I am your host, and I want to thank you for tuning into the very first episode of what I hope to be a road trip of sorts up and down Florida's highways, along our coastlines, and definitely through some of our back roads as we explore the history, mysteries, legends, and lore from the Sunshine State. But before we dive into today's story, I wanted to take a moment to let you know a little bit about myself. You know, one of those little getting to know you moments that you usually find on the first episode of any podcast. So, again, my name's Joe Turino, and I was born in Miami, Florida. I've lived here pretty much all my life. I was raised in Hialeah, Florida, and I really love history. History was one of those subjects that when I was growing up in school actually caught my attention besides art class, PE, and lunch. So I love American history, world history, and especially I love Florida history. I love learning about where I live, and I'm a big believer that you have to know where we come from in order to appreciate where we are today. So that's a little bit why I decided to even start this thing. Besides that, I really love weird shit. Like all the weird shit. Ghosts, hauntings, aliens, UFOs, cryptids, cults, conspiracy theories, you name it. I love it. I read as much as I can about all these subjects. I watch all the shows and documentaries, and I have a ton of books here. I love it. It fascinates me. So naturally, this led me to joining War Party Paranormal. We are a South Florida-based paranormal research team where I've been fortunate enough to not only satisfy my own curiosity when it comes to investigating some crazy haunted locations, but I also get to learn about some pretty cool history about these places. And I decided what better place to share them with you than right here on this show. From down in the Keys all the way through the Panhandle and everywhere in between the Gulf and Atlantic coast, Florida is not only full of amazing history, we're full of some weird ass stories, and I cannot wait to get into them with you. You see, I like to think of Florida as our nation's capital of weird. We're home to countless stories of hauntings and cryptid encounters, UFO sightings and other high strangeness, bizarre true crime tales and cold cases. And I shit you not, I even heard a story about a guy that used a squirrel as a weapon during a robbery. Yes, you heard that right. We got all these kinds of stories and more down here in this wonderful, weird place that I get to call my home. And my goal on this show is to share them all with you. So for those of you that are not from Florida, I want to welcome you and thank you for listening. And I want to tell you to prepare your brains and your mind. We're going to get into some weird shit down here. And for all you locals that are listening, I really thank you as well. And I hope that I do you proud. All right, so let's get this party started. I figured as today's episode is episode 1, we should start at the very beginning of Florida. And of course, the very beginnings of Florida start with a legend. The legend of the Fountain of Youth. And of course, you can't talk about the Fountain legend without talking about the man who is most associated with it, Spanish conquistador and explorer Juan Ponce de Leon. So we're going to get into his origins a bit, his expedition that led to the discovery of Florida, and of course his search for the Fountain of Youth. But before we get into any of that stuff, we're going to hop into the way back machine, and we're going to go explore how the legend of the fountain got started in the first place. And it might be a little surprising to some of you. So here we go. All right, so full disclosure, when I started this and I decided that I'm going to start with Florida's origin story, in my head, I was like, all right, it's the Fountain of Youth. It's, it's easy. It's a story that everybody knows and should be an easy one just to get the ball rolling before we get into like the real weird shit, for the show. And when I started researching this thing, I did not realize how far this legend actually goes back. It goes back thousands of years. And of course, it's because man as a species has always had this thing in their head that, we want immortality, we want to live forever. And, of course, it ended up being tied into like so many myths and legends that come from all over the freaking world. And again, like I thought this was, had to do with the Spaniards and coming over, and no, this is everywhere. So we're going to get into this thing, and I'm going to start going over some of the history and where all this started from. And there are a lot of names here that are very difficult to pronounce, at least for me. And I don't want to hear any shit from you guys of, hey, Joe, you fucked up that name, and hey, you misspelled that, and this is my first time doing this. I am a rookie. I am not a, historian. I don't know all this shit. I'm doing this for fun because I love looking at all this stuff. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Don't get on my ass if I start getting some names wrong. All right, so the first time in recorded history that the quest for immortality is actually mentioned, it comes from ancient Mesopotamia, and it was found on the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was written sometime between 2100 and 1200 BC. It was found on stone tablets. I mean, that's how old this thing goes. I forgot how many tablets exactly it was, but I believe it's on tablet 11. It talks about Gilgamesh diving into the sea in search for this plant that anyone who eats it, it'll restore their youth. So that's the first time ever that immortality or trying to gain immortality is ever mentioned in writings that have been found. In 219 BC, the ruler of the ancient Chinese Qin dynasty, Qin Shi Huang, feared death and sought a way to live forever. So he sent out Taoist alchemist Zhu Fu on a quest to find and retrieve a secret elixir of immortality that was supposedly found over on Mount Penglai, and that was being kept by some immortals living on that mountain. You can find mentions of the elixir of life or the elixir of immortality in various religious texts throughout history, including the Hindi scriptures, where it's referred to as Amrita, and it is said to give immortality to anyone who consumes even the tiniest amount. So, think of even like a drop of this stuff would make you live forever. All right, so getting into the Fountain of Youth legend in particular, it's been referred to as the Waters of Life as well, and it is been described as a magical spring, river, or body of water that allegedly restores the youth of or heals any and all ailments afflicting those who drink from or bathe in its waters. An ancient Greek historian and geographer named Herodotus from the 5th century BC mentions a fountain with special kinds of water that gave the ancient Macrobians exceptionally long life. And there's a folk tale from around the 8th century Japan that tells the stories of the waters of life being in possession of the moon god Tsukuyomi, who decided to give the waters to man. However, the person that was entrusted to bring the waters to Earth got tired and decided to take a break. And while he took a break, there was this serpent that came in and bathed in the waters. And as soon as the serpent came out, it shed its skin and it rendered the waters unusable. And that's how their legend is, how man is doomed to, grow old and die, but snakes shed their skin and keep growing and keep living. So I thought that was a pretty cool story. And there's a version of the fountain legend that's actually in the Bible, in the King James version of the Bible, John chapter 5, verse 2 through 4, where it talks about the pool of Bethesda, whose waters were said to be periodically stirred by an angel, upon which the first person to step into it would be healed of whatever affliction that they had. And finally, we get to the Alexander romance from around the 3rd century AD. The Eastern versions of this story talk about the waters of life and describe Alexander the Great and his servant crossing the land of darkness to find a restorative spring. Now, during and after the Moorish rule of Spain, the Arabic versions of the Alexander romance were very popular throughout the country, throughout Spain, and definitely would have been known by most of the explorers who, traveled across the Atlantic to the Americas during this time period. So this explains, how we got the story of the Fountain of Youth over in the Caribbean and in the Americas during the time of the Age of Discovery. All right, so now that we've gotten through the origin story for the Fountain of Youth and the Waters of Life, or the Elixirs of Life, let's jump into Juan Ponce de Leon, his origin story, and how he became tied to the Fountain of Youth legend himself. All right, so Juan Ponce de Leon was born in the village of Santervas de Campos in the northern part of Spain, in the province that is currently known as Valladolid. We don't have an exact date when he was born, but historians have put it somewhere in either 1460 or 1474. That's the current consensus of when he was actually born. And even though historians have been able to track down where he's from and more or less when he was born, we really don't know too much about his family. What is known is that he was of noble birth, and he did serve in the Spanish military from a young age. He served as a squire to Pedro Núñez de Guzman, who was the knight commander of the Order of Calatrava, and later he would gain experience as a soldier fighting for Spain against the Moors in Granada, which completed the reconquest of Spain in 1492. Once the war was over, he really didn't have any more need to serve in Spain's military, so he decided to start looking for other opportunities. One of these opportunities was actually him joining Christopher Columbus as one of 200 gentlemen volunteers on Columbus's second voyage to the New World. They departed Spain in September 1493 and arrived in the Caribbean in November 1493. Now, they visited several islands before actually arriving in Hispaniola, which was their destination, and one of those islands was called Borinquen, which later we would know it as Puerto Rico. Now, historians are actually uncertain about what Ponce did over the next several years, but it's possible that he did make his way back to Spain and then later returned to Hispaniola in 1502 with the newly appointed governor, Nicolas de Ovando. When they arrived, Ovando found the colony in disarray, and he was instructed by the Spanish crown to bring it to order. So this actually led Ovando to authorizing what would be known as the Jaragua Massacre, which took place in November 1503. Here, Ovando and 300 men, as well as other local natives from other tribes around the Caribbean, would kill dozens of Taínos. Those were one of the native tribes to Hispaniola. And they would burn the town of Jaragua down to the ground for allegedly planning a rebellion against the Spaniards who were stationed there. The Taínos answered back and overran a small Spanish garrison in the city of Higüey. And of course, Ovando was pissed off about this. So in 1504, he assigned Ponce to go in and take out the remaining Taíno rebels once and for all. You got to remember that Ponce de Leon was a soldier. He was a military man his entire life. So when he gets ordered to go in and take people out, he goes in there and takes people out. This would become known as the Higüey Massacre, and he would, kill a lot of the rebels that were left over, and the ones who did survive were actually taken in as slaves. Naturally, Ovando was very pleased with Ponce, and he rewarded him by appointing him the frontier governor of the province, and he also gave him a very nice land grant, which Ponce quickly began to farm, as well as build his estate using the Indian slave labor that he acquired. He quickly found a ready market for his farm's produce and livestock in the nearby town of Boca de Yuma, where the Spanish ships would stock up on the supplies before heading back to Spain. He was even authorized to establish a new town in the Higüey province that he would name Salvaleon, and it was also around this time that Ponce would marry his wife Lenora, and they would actually end up having 3 daughters and 1 son. So Ponce made a lot of money during this time and built up his estate, kept everything going, kept selling all this, all his goods. And of course, he was still the provincial governor. So part of that duty is to try to keep good relations with the rest of the Caribbean islanders that were around. So he would meet from time to time with some of the remaining Taínos. Remember all those people who he massacred? He would meet with the ones who were left, just to try to keep some good relations going. It was during some of these meetings that they would share stories of fertile land with gold in the rivers, and of course, these kinds of stories intrigued Ponce. He was ready to head over there and search for these riches, these rivers full of gold himself. So he eventually requested and received permission from Ovando to go in and explore Puerto Rico in search of all this gold. Now, it wasn't until 1508 that Ponce got the go-ahead for the first official expedition to Puerto Rico. This came directly from King Ferdinand II. And on July 12, 1508, Ponce left from Hispaniola with 1 ship and a crew of about 50 men, and they eventually anchored in San Juan Bay. Once they were ashore, they searched the inland and found a site about 2 miles from the bay where they would erect a storehouse and a fortified house, thus creating the first European settlement in Puerto Rico that Ponce named Capara. Eventually, we would know it as San Juan. Though the settlers did plant crops in the new settlement, they would dedicate the majority of their time searching for gold, which they actually did find. They found a bunch of gold. The settlers stayed there till early 1509, when Ponce decided it was time to head back to Hispaniola. They were actually running kind of low on food and supplies, and they wanted to come back and show all the gold that they found to Ovando, who deemed this first expedition a great success. And as a reward, Ovando appointed Ponce as the governor of the province, which was later confirmed by Ferdinand II on August 14th, 1509. Ponce would eventually return to Puerto Rico on the king's instruction to extend the settlement and to continue mining for gold. This time, he brought his wife and kids in tow. Now, at the same time that Ponce was settling Puerto Rico, there was trouble brewing in the politics and government of the Spanish West Indies by way of Diego Colón, who was the son of Christopher Columbus. You see, upon discovery of the New World, the Spanish crown granted Columbus a bunch of rights and authorities that would also be transferred to any of his heirs. Diego would wage a long legal battle against the crown for these rights and would eventually win, which forced Ferdinand II to appoint him as viceroy. Colón would arrive in Hispaniola on July 10, 1509, replacing Governor Nicolas Ovando, who was always a big fan and supporter of Ponce de Leon. And although the courts had ordered that Ponce should remain in office, Colón was able to find a way to circumvent this directive by appointing Juan Cerón as the Chief Justice and Miguel Diaz as the Chief Constable of the island, which effectively overrode Ponce's authority as governor. Now, this situation kept going until March 2nd, 1510, when Ferdinand issued orders reaffirming Ponce's position as governor. Unfortunately, this political back and forth between Colón and Ponce would continue over the next few years, and eventually on November 28, 1511, Ponce would be officially removed as governor from Puerto Rico. But luckily for him, even though he was removed as the governor, Ponce still had many influential supporters back in Spain, and Ferdinand regarded him as a loyal servant. You see, by 1511, rumors of undiscovered islands to the northwest of Hispaniola had reached Spain, and Ferdinand was interested in forestalling further exploration and discovery by Colón. So, in an effort to reward him for his services, and also as a big fuck you to Colón for all the shit he had stirred up, Ferdinand urged Ponce to search for these new lands outside the authority of Colón. Of course, Ponce was immediately on board, and in 1512 a royal contract was dispatched outlining his rights and authorities to search for these alleged undiscovered islands. This contract stipulated that Ponce held exclusive rights to the discovery of these and any neighboring islands for the next 3 years. He would be appointed governor for life to any lands that he discovered. However, the contract also stipulated that Ponce was to finance all the costs of the exploration and settlement himself, which at this time was not a problem for him since he made a shitload of money between all his farming and all his shares of gold from the expeditions to Puerto Rico. The contract also gave specific instructions for the distribution of any gold found, Native American slaves that were taken, and any other profits that were extracted from the new lands. Now, it is possible that Ponce agreed to this new venture for a totally different reason. It is said that it was around this time that Ponce was told by the Caribbean islanders from Hispaniola, Cuba, and Puerto Rico of the island of Bimini. Local legend described Bimini as a mythical land full of wealth and prosperity, and that this was also where he would find the fabled Fountain of Youth. It is speculated that Ponce de Leon became so obsessed with the thought of making such a grand discovery that the search for the Fountain of Youth became his true motivation for this expedition. So on March 4th, 1513, commanding a small fleet of 3 ships, the Santiago, the San Cristobal, and the Santa Maria de la Consolacion, with a crew of around 200 men, Ponce de Leon set out from the island of Puerto Rico. The ship sailed northwest along the Bahama Islands, known at the time as the Lucayos, and on March 27, 1513, Easter Sunday, they spotted an island that was unfamiliar to the sailors on the expedition. For the next several days, the fleet crossed open water, and on April 2nd, 1513, they sighted land which Ponce de Leon believed was another island. The crew anchored the ships and came ashore the following day. Ponce named this newly discovered land La Floweirda due to its lush green landscape and because it was so close to the Easter season, known to the Spaniards as Pascua Florida, which translates to the Festival of Flowers. Now, believe it or not, there is some speculation regarding the actual location where Ponce and his men landed. We've all been taught that the landing occurred at or near present-day St. Augustine, but there are some historians who can place the landing site further south in an area known as Ponce de Leon Inlet, which is near New Smyrna Beach, Florida, while there are also others who place it even further south near Melbourne Beach. All right, so the ship stayed in the area where they landed for about 5 days before turning south for further exploration along the coast. On April 8th, they were forced to anchor as they encountered a strong current that ended up pushing the ships backwards. This current was so strong that the smallest ship, which was the San Cristobal, was carried out to sea and it was actually lost for about 2 days. This current would later be known as the Gulf Stream, and it would become the primary route for any ship leaving the Spanish Indies for Europe. So not only did he discover Florida, they actually discovered the Gulf Stream. So in an attempt to not get caught up in the Gulf Stream and in its current again, they decided that the best course of action would be for them to hug the coastline for the rest of their voyage. So they continued south, and they eventually reached and named Biscayne Bay. They landed somewhere around present-day Key Biscayne and took some time to explore more parts of the mainland, including the Tequesta Miami Mound town at the mouth of the Miami River. On May 15th, they left Biscayne Bay and continued sailing along the Florida Keys, looking for passage to head north and explore the west coast of Florida. Ponce said that from a distance, the Keys actually reminded him of men who were suffering, so he named them Los Mártires, or the Martyrs. After a little time, they were able to find a gap through the reefs that were large enough for the ships to sail through, and they continued until they once again reached Florida's mainland on May 23rd. So just as Ponce de Leon's original landing site had been contested for years, so was the exact site of their West Coast landing. The area that's most commonly associated with their West Coast landing is somewhere in the vicinity of Charlotte Harbor, which is near Punta Gorda. There are some historians who believe that they landed in Tampa Bay or even as far north as Pensacola, Florida. But there are still others that have argued that more than likely they landed at Cape Romano, which is located just south of Marco Island, or at Cape Sable, which is the southernmost point of the U.S. and of the Florida mainland. So once they landed, Ponce and his crew took some time, to gather some water and to make some repairs to their ships, but they were approached by the native Calusa. They originally appeared interested in trading, and unfortunately that changed pretty quickly. We aren't too sure who attacked who first. My money is on the Spaniards, but they got into several skirmishes while the Spaniards were there, resulting in several casualties on both sides, as well as the Spaniards taking 8 Calusa captive. The Spaniards were able to hold off the Calusas long enough to make the repairs to the ships, and they took off again on June 14th, this time in search of another chain of islands that were described by the captured Calusa. This chain of islands were eventually called the Dry Tortugas, and they arrived on June 21st. From here, they sailed southwest in an attempt to circle around Cuba and return to Puerto Rico, but they did not take into account how strong the Gulf Stream was. They were pushed east and ended up back on the northeast shore of Cuba, and they were initially confused about the location, but the fleet regained their bearings, retraced their route along the Florida Keys around the east coast of Florida, and they reached Grand Bahama on July 8th. It was from here that the fleet disbanded, and Ponce tasked the Santa Maria with further exploration. Ponce and the rest of the crew returned to Puerto Rico, arriving on October 19th, almost 8 months after they originally left on the expedition. But when Ponce arrived back in Puerto Rico, he found the island in chaos. A Carib war party from the neighboring islands had attacked the settlement and burned it to the ground, killing several Spaniards. Luckily, his family narrowly escaped the attack, but his home was destroyed. Ponce decided that this was a good time to head back to Spain and personally report the results from his expedition to King Ferdinand. So he left Puerto Rico to make the trip back across the Atlantic in April 1514. Upon his arrival in Spain, he met with the king, he was knighted, and he was given a personal coat of arms. He would become the first conquistador ever to receive these honors. A short time later, he visited the Casa de Contratación, which was the central bureaucracy and clearinghouse for all of Spain's activities in the New World. Here, he detailed notes of his discoveries that would be added to the Padrón Real, which was a master map that served as a basis for official navigation charts used by the Spanish captains. Also, while he was in Spain, a new contract was drawn up for Ponce that confirmed his rights to settle and govern both Bimini and Florida. Ferdinand II also ordered Ponce to organize an armada to attack and subdue the Caribs who continued to attack the Spanish settlements in the Caribbean. 3 ships were purchased, and on May 14, 1515, Ponce once again left Spain with his small fleet, but this mission would be short-lived. Ferdinand II died in 1516, and the campaign came to an abrupt end. The king had been a strong supporter of Ponce de Leon, so he returned to Spain following the news of his death. He also felt that it was imperative that he return to defend his privileges and titles, but he received assurances of support from the newly appointed regent of Spain, Cardinal Francisco Jimenez de Cisneros. It would be almost 2 years before Ponce would once again return home to Puerto Rico, and another 3 years after that before he would even return to Florida. In early 1521, Ponce organized a second expedition in an attempt to colonize Spanish Florida. This expedition consisted of about 200 men, including priests, farmers, and artisans, as well as 50 horses and other domestic animals and farming equipment, all on 2 ships. It is thought that they landed somewhere in southwest Florida near Charlotte Harbor, which is an area that allegedly was visited by Ponce during his first voyage. But before a settlement could be established, the colonists were attacked by the Calusa. The expedition would quickly abandon the colonization attempt and would sail to Havana, Cuba, where Ponce de Leon, who was mortally wounded by a poisoned arrow during one of the skirmishes, would soon die. His body was eventually taken back to Puerto Rico, where he was buried in the crypt beneath the San Jose Church. His remains would later be exhumed and transferred to the Cathedral of San Juan Bautista, where you can still visit his grave today. So if you've made it to this point in the story, you're probably thinking to yourself, what the hell happened with the Fountain of Youth? Well, it turns out that the legend of the Fountain of Youth wouldn't actually be attached to Ponce de Leon until after his death. Though none of the original documents from the expedition survived, Juan Ponce de Leon made no mention of the Fountain of Youth in the detailed account he gave at the Casa de Contratación during his return visit to Spain after his first expedition. He also sent letters to his new kings Charles V and to the future Pope Adrian VI before leaving on his second expedition, where once again there was no mention of the fountain. Instead, the letter spoke of his desires to settle the new land, spread Christianity, and to determine if Florida was an island or a peninsula. Now, most historians agree that the first mention of Ponce de Leon searching for the fountain didn't come into play until 1535, when a manuscript was written by another Spanish explorer and historian named Gonzalo Fernández de Oviedo y Valdés. His manuscript was actually written in an attempt to make fun of Ponce de Leon. In it, he calls Ponce an old man that was searching for the fountain in an attempt to cure his sexual impotence. In 1551, a similar account was written by another Spanish historian, Francisco López de Gomora. These claims, though funny in my opinion, don't hold up, no pun intended, because remember, Ponce and his wife had 4 kids, so I don't think Ponce had any issues getting a hard-on, but again, that's my opinion. In 1575, the memoir of Hernando de Escalante Fontaneda, a shipwreck survivor who lived among the Native Americans of Florida, tells the tale of the restorative waters of a lost river located somewhere in Florida, and he mentions that Ponce de Leon may have been looking for them. However, Fontaneda makes it clear that he was very skeptical that these stories are true. And in 1601, Antonio de Herrera y Tordesillas, the Spanish king's chief historian in the West Indies, penned a detailed and widely read account of Ponce de Leon's first expedition. Though only mentioned in passing, Herrera wrote that the Fountain of Youth turned old men into boys. It would be this account, and not the Boner Basher stories, that would help solidify the public's imagination, and the legend of Ponce de Leon's search for the Fountain of Youth gained traction throughout Spain and later throughout the world. After the Spanish ceded Florida to the United States in 1819, American writers and artists, including Washington Irving, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and Thomas Moran, helped bring the legend to the American public through various stories and paintings. The legend of the Fountain of Youth is still alive and well today, especially in St. Augustine, Florida. In the early 20th century, a statue of Juan Ponce de Leon was erected in the central plaza of St. Augustine, overlooking the Matanzas Bay at the entrance of the Bridge of Lions. St. Augustine is also home to the Fountain of Youth Archaeological Park. This is said to be the site where Ponce de Leon supposedly landed and explored upon his arrival in Florida, as well as the site that would eventually be settled in 1565 by Pedro Menendez de Aviles, the founder of St. Augustine. In very Florida fashion, this property is considered Florida's oldest attraction, having been in operation since the early 1860s. Year after year, thousands of tourists visit the park to take a drink from the Fountain of Youth's sulfur-smelling water, as the water contains over 30 minerals that many believe have healthful properties. The park also features actors who walk around dressed in Spanish conquistador armor, a planetarium, and an exhibit dedicated to the Timucua Indians who have inhabited the area for thousands of years. However, St. Augustine is not the only city in Florida that claims to be home to the Fountain of Youth. The city of Punta Gorda also has made this claim for more than 100 years. The Punta Gorda fountain, which resembles an actual drinking fountain, was so popular in its heyday that the tap handle had to be replaced every 6 months because it was constantly being worn out. The fountain is still around today, but I would strongly caution anyone from drinking from it. You see, in the 1980s, the EPA began testing the public water fountains in the area for radioactivity, and they quickly learned that the water from this fountain was contaminated with almost double the amount that is considered safe, thus giving it the name that it is locally known by, the radioactive Fountain of Youth. Not far from Punta Gorda, in the town of Northport, you will find the warm mineral springs. This water-filled sinkhole has also been said to be the Fountain of Youth, as its mineral-rich waters are thought to have healing properties, which led to the spring being purchased and developed into a privately owned natural spa in the 1960s. Today it is owned by Sarasota County and the city of Northport, and it is open to the public. But before you go and take a dip in it yourself, I should note that the sinkhole has been described by archaeologists as a burial ground for its prehistoric residents, as the remains of more than 20 Paleo-Indians have been found inside by divers, some that have been radiocarbon dated back 12,000 years. But at 230 feet deep, I don't think you're going to have to worry about running into any undiscovered remains, so swim at your own risk. Even St. Petersburg, Florida, which is just outside of Tampa, is home to one of the Fountain of Youths. Once referred to as Health City, the St. Pete Fountain of Youth was opened back in 1901 as a health spa where patrons could bathe and drink in its sulfurous waters. The mineral water that fed the fountain came from an artisan well near the old St. Petersburg Pier. Unfortunately, the spa was moved in 1946 after a hurricane destroyed the original pier. But this location still flourished as the Fountain of Youth for years after. Several statues of Ponce de Leon were placed here through the years until 1975, when it was closed for good. Today, a plaza located near the Salvador Dali Museum has a tribute to the old attraction where visitors can still take a drink from a public fountain, even though it's now just fed by regular municipal drinking water. So in closing, whether you believe there is any truth to the fountain legend or not is entirely up to you. Who knows, maybe the real fountain was never meant to be found in Florida in the first place. Maybe its magical healing waters are still sitting in a forgotten ancient city somewhere in an area of the world just waiting to be discovered. To this day, we still get news stories of archaeologists discovering cities thought to have been lost to time, and there's no telling what secrets these places may hold. All I can say is that the story of Ponce de Leon and his search for the Fountain of Youth is one legend that is still alive and well today in Florida, and is one that will always be tied to her origin story. And that's it for episode 1. Woo! We did it, guys. Thank you very much for listening and for sticking with me to the end on this legendary Florida origin story. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, this was one of those stories that I've always heard growing up, and I really thought was going to be a quickie just to get the ball rolling. But man, when I started digging in, I realized that there was just so much cool information behind it that I never knew, and I felt that I had to share with you guys. Especially when it came to researching the origins of the legend itself. I can't believe that this history goes back so far. And also finding out that ponds being tied to this legend is actually supposed to be just one big boner joke. I thought that was pretty funny. I really thought he was looking for the fountain and ended up in Florida, but I guess I'm just a dumbass. But either way, I thought it was a fun story, and thank you again just for sticking with me to the end. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear some more stories from around Florida, please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts and share with your friends and family. Also, please take some time to leave a review as it helps people find the show. You can also follow the show on Instagram at floweirda.podcast, where I will be posting photos to go along with each episode. And if you have your own Floweirda story that you want to share or have any topics that you want covered, shoot me an email at floweirda@gmail.com. Before we wrap up, I want to give a big shout out to my friend Ernesto and his band Modern Mimes for making the awesome theme music for the show. Go check them out on iTunes, Spotify, or pretty much everywhere you purchase or stream your music. Go give them a follow on their Instagram and Facebook pages over at Modern Mimes, and go check out their music videos on their YouTube channel. They recently released some new original music as well as a killer Seven Dust cover, and they also tour around the US, so please go out and show your support whenever they play in your area. And last but not least, I mentioned at the top of the show that I am a paranormal investigator with War Party Paranormal in South Florida. We are the largest paranormal team in Florida, and we hold what we like to call public interactive paranormal investigations in several of the historic and haunted locations throughout South Florida that I plan to cover on future episodes of the show. So if you're interested in joining us for any upcoming events, please go check out our team's website over at www.warpartyparanormal.com for dates and links to purchase tickets. And all proceeds from these events go right back to these locations to help them with the historical preservation and maintenance. Besides helping in the preservation of these locations, our goal with these events is to get out in front of the public, not only to educate, but to show you that you don't have to live in fear if you're experiencing paranormal occurrences in your own home or businesses. War Party Paranormal specializes in residential cases, and we have helped hundreds of clients throughout Florida. Our residential cases are completely confidential and 100% free, so please reach out to War Party Paranormal on our website if you need help, and our case manager will reach out to you to get some more information. Also, if you haven't already, please go out and check out the War Party Paranormal radio show every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, featuring various team members not only talking about the locations we've investigated, but we also share the evidence that we've captured during these investigations. And from time to time, our team leader Eric Vanderlaan and case manager Mike Del Coro interview some special guests, investigators, as well as paranormal celebrities from some of your favorite television and internet shows. It's a lot of fun, and you can find it on KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network's website and YouTube channel, as well as on the War Party Paranormal Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can also find my personal ghost hunting content at Joe Hunts Ghosts on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. We'll be back in 2 weeks for the next episode of Greetings from Floweirda, where we're going to be heading down south to Key West, Florida. Key West is one of my favorite cities in all of Florida. I've spent a lot of time down here. It's full of pirate stories, Civil War history, American history, ghosts, hauntings. But what we're going to get into is the Corpse Bride of Key West. Some of you may know this story, others may not, but essentially it's about this doctor who was infatuated with this woman who he was treating for an illness. She ends up passing away, and let's just say that his infatuation with her went on well beyond her death. So if you want to listen to this very real and very fucked up Florida story, please be sure to join us in 2 weeks for episode 2 of Greetings from Floweirda. But until then, please don't go drinking any radioactive water thinking you're going to gain eternal life. Make sure you keep your love stick healthy and in tip-top shape. And of course, stay weird, Florida. We'll see you next time.